My name is Brenda, and at 62 years old, I thought I'd experienced all the heartache life could offer. But watching my only daughter Eleanor walk down the aisle, I never imagined the joy of her wedding day would end with her palm striking my cheek. The guests gasped in horror as the sound echoed through the reception hall. What stunned them even more was my response. I laughed. Not from humor, but from a sad revelation that had been years in the making. Before I continue this story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Please hit like and subscribe, because every family has secrets waiting to be exposed. I never planned to be a single mother. My husband Carl and I had dreams of raising a house full of children, but life had other plans. When Eleanor was 8, cancer took Carl from us in just 6 months. One day he was coaching her soccer team, the next he was gone. I was 38, suddenly alone with a heartbroken child and a mountain of medical bills. Those early years were a blur of grief and exhaustion. I sold our family home in the suburbs and moved us to a small 2-bedroom apartment closer to the city. With only my teaching salary, I picked up evening shifts at a local bookstore and weekend catering jobs to make ends meet. My hands were always busy, but my heart remained empty. Eleanor struggled with losing her father. She would sit by the window every Sunday afternoon, the time Carl used to return from their special daddy-daughter breakfast outings, waiting for a car that would never pull into our driveway again. Those silent vigils broke my heart, and I vowed to give her everything I possibly could to make up for what she'd lost. Despite our financial constraints, I was determined that Eleanor would have every opportunity. I scrimped on everything for myself, wearing the same 3 outfits to work in rotation, cutting my own hair, never taking vacations, so Eleanor could attend the best private school in our area. When she showed talent for dance, I found a way to pay for lessons, often working overnight shifts, to cover the expensive recital costumes and competition fees. "Mum, why do you work so much?" 10-year-old Eleanor once asked, as I dozed off while helping with her homework after a 16-hour workday. "Because my beautiful girl deserves the world," I told her, forcing my tired eyes open. "And I promised your daddy I'd make sure you had every chance to shine." Through elementary school, Eleanor remained the sweet, grateful child who would make thank you cards for me just because. She would proudly tell her friends, "My mum is the strongest person in the world. She does the work of 2 parents." The shift began gradually during her high school years. Eleanor attended Westfield Academy, where most of her classmates came from wealthy families with vacation homes and luxury cars. At first, she seemed immune to the materialism around her. By sophomore year, though, I noticed changes. "Mum, can we go shopping this weekend? Everyone's wearing designer jeans this season," she'd say. Or "Sarah's parents are taking her whole friend group to Paris for spring break. It's so unfair I can't go." I explained our financial situation as gently as I could. "Honey, I'm putting away money for your college fund. That's more important than temporary things." She'd respond with eye rolls and slammed doors. "You don't understand what it's like to be the charity case." Those words stung, but I told myself it was normal teenage rebellion. I never stopped working and saving, determined that Eleanor would have the education that would open doors for her future. By the time Eleanor left for college at Northwestern University, our relationship had become strained but functional. She'd call weekly, usually when she needed money or advice on navigating campus life. I missed the closeness we once shared, but hoped the distance would help her appreciate what we had. During her second year of law school, Eleanor called with excitement I hadn't heard in her voice for years. "Mum, I've met someone amazing. His name is Jackson Whitfield. His family has that chain of luxury hotels. He's brilliant and sophisticated, and he asked me to meet his parents this weekend." I was thrilled to hear her so happy. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. He sounds special." "He is, Mum. He's from a really important family. This could change everything for me." The way she emphasized important gave me pause, but I pushed the feeling aside. My daughter was happy. That's what mattered. The first time I met Jackson was during a holiday break. He was undeniably handsome, with perfect posture and carefully chosen words. He was polite, holding doors open and asking questions about my teaching career, but I sensed a certain rehearsed quality to his interest. "Mrs. Anderson Eleanor tells me you've made incredible sacrifices for her education. That's very admirable," he said in a tone one might use to comment on an unusual museum exhibit. "It's just what parents do," I replied, noticing how Eleanor beamed at his approval. When I finally met Jackson's family at their estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, I understood why Eleanor had been so nervous. The Whitfield family home was practically a compound with manicured gardens and staff that moved invisibly through the rooms. Jackson's mother, Sylvia, with her perfectly highlighted hair and tennis-toned arms, greeted me with air kisses. "Eleanor has told us so much about you. It must have been so difficult raising her on your own," she said, emphasizing difficult, as though discussing a particularly challenging charity case. Jackson's father, Howard, barely looked up from his phone during dinner, though he did engage when conversation turned to Eleanor's career prospects. "Eleanor tells me she's interested in corporate law. The Whitfield Foundation always needs good legal minds," he said, not quite making it clear if he was offering an opportunity or merely making conversation. Throughout dinner, I watched Eleanor transform before my eyes. Her natural laugh was replaced with a subdued, elegant chuckle. She carefully mimicked Sylvia's way of holding her wineglass. When I mentioned her childhood dream of becoming a public defender, Eleanor quickly changed the subject. "Mom has always been supportive of whatever path I choose," she said, giving me a warning glance. By the time dessert was served, I felt like I was dining with a stranger wearing my daughter's face. This perfectly poised young woman, who carefully weighed each word, bore little resemblance to the passionate, justice-oriented girl who once organized a fundraiser for her middle school janitor when she learned he couldn't afford his wife's medication. As our visit concluded, Sylvia took Eleanor aside for what looked like an intense conversation. In the car ride back to my hotel, Eleanor was unusually quiet. "They're wonderful people, aren't they?" she finally said, more statement than question. "They certainly have a beautiful home," I answered carefully. "Jackson seems to care for you very much." "His mother thinks I have potential," Eleanor said, pride evident in her voice. "She's going to introduce me to her designer friends in New York. She says with the right styling I could really fit in with their circle." The implication that my daughter wasn't already good enough hung in the air between us. 6 months later, Eleanor called to announce her engagement. Jackson had proposed with a family heirloom ring at his parents' summer home in the Hamptons. I was genuinely happy for her, but concerned by her next words. "Mum, we're thinking of a spring wedding. Sylvia knows all the best venues and vendors. She's already made some calls to help us." "That's thoughtful of her. What kind of wedding are you envisioning?" I asked, remembering how Eleanor had once described her dream garden wedding with wildflowers and twinkle lights. Something elegant but understated, nothing gaudy. Sylvia says less is more when it comes to demonstrating real class. By the time I hung up, I realized I hadn't heard Eleanor's wishes once. Only Sylvia's opinions filtered through my daughter's voice. The pre-wedding dinner confirmed my worst fears. Hosted at an exclusive restaurant where the menu had no prices, it was clearly designed to impress the Whitfield family friends. I wore my best dress, a blue cocktail number I'd splurged on for a colleague's retirement party. Eleanor took one look at me and frowned. "Oh, Mum, didn't you get my text about the dress code?" "I thought this was formal," I said, suddenly conscious of being underdressed compared to the designer outfits surrounding me. "It's fine," she said in a tone that made clear it wasn't. "Just try not to gesture so much when you talk. It draws attention." Later, when I used the wrong fork for my salad, Eleanor corrected me in front of Jackson's college roommate and his wife. "Mum, the smaller fork is for salad," she whispered, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. I smiled through my humiliation, making a joke about being more focused on food than formality. The couple laughed politely, but Eleanor's face flushed with embarrassment. By the time the check arrived, I felt completely out of place. Howard Whitfield insisted on paying, waving away my offer to contribute with a dismissive, "Please, we're delighted to host." Eleanor and Jackson walked me to my car afterwards. Before I could hug her goodnight, she straightened my collar and said, Remember, the ceremony starts at 4 sharp. Please don't be late. As I drove back to my hotel room, tears blurred my vision. What had happened to my daughter? Where was the girl who once made me dandelion crowns and said I was the most beautiful mom in the world, even when I was exhausted from working 3 jobs? I wondered if Carl would recognize the woman our daughter had become. The weeks leading up to Eleanor's wedding were a whirlwind of activities from which I was largely excluded. Despite my repeated offers to help, Eleanor insisted everything was under control. Honestly, Mom Sylvia has connections with all the best people. She's handling most of it, Eleanor explained during one of our increasingly rare phone conversations. What Eleanor didn't explicitly mention was that I was funding a significant portion of the wedding. After Carl died, I had opened a special savings account, adding to it monthly, with the intention of helping pay for Eleanor's education and eventually her wedding. By the time she finished law school, I had managed to save $75,000, no small feat on a teacher's salary supplemented by part-time work. When Eleanor called to discuss the wedding budget, I had offered the entire amount. "Oh, Mum, that's so generous," she had said, sounding genuinely touched. "But are you sure that's a lot of money?" "I've been saving for this since you were 8, I told her. "Your father would have wanted you to have the wedding of your dreams." What hurt wasn't that the money was being spent. That was its purpose after all. What stung was how Eleanor discussed the wedding finances with others, as though the beautiful affair was solely the result of the Whitfields' generosity. At the engagement party, I overheard her thanking Sylvia effusively for making all this possible without any acknowledgement of my contribution. One Tuesday afternoon, Eleanor unexpectedly stopped by my apartment while she was in the area for a vendor meeting. Her real purpose soon became clear. "Mum, I was thinking—" She began studying me with a critical eye. "The wedding is only 6 weeks away, and maybe we should consider updating your look a bit." "My look," I echoed, glancing down at my comfortable teaching clothes. "Just some subtle enhancements. Sylvia's stylist, Nancy, is amazing. She works with lots of women your age. And I've booked you an appointment at Sylvia's salon for highlights. Your grey is starting to show." She reached out to touch my hair, which I'd let return to its natural salt and pepper state years ago. I tried to hide my hurt. "I thought we agreed on that forest green dress we saw at Nordstrom last month. You said it looked nice." Eleanor sighed. "It was fine for a department store option, but Nancy found this gorgeous Armani pantsuit that would be perfect. It's classic and won't stand out too much in the photos." "Won't stand out too much?" The words echoed in my head as Eleanor continued talking about shoes and accessories. The message was clear: I needed to be presentable, but invisible. The following weekend, I decided to look for a dress on my own. At a small boutique downtown, I found a beautiful silver gown with delicate beadwork that reminded me of starlight. The saleswoman, an elegant woman about my age, assured me it was perfect. "You look radiant," she said, as I twirled in front of the 3-way mirror. "Is it for a special occasion?" "My daughter's wedding," I replied, feeling beautiful for the first time in months. I sent Eleanor a photo, excited to share my find. Her response was immediate and deflating. "Mom, that's way too flashy. You look like you're trying to be the center of attention. Please return it and wait for Nancy to contact you about the pantsuit." I returned the dress the next day, apologizing to the kind saleswoman who looked confused by my decision. With each passing week, I felt increasingly sidelined in the wedding preparations. Sylvia had taken over completely, from the flower arrangements to the seating charts. When I finally received my copy of the seating plan, I discovered I wasn't at the family table, but seated with distant cousins of the Whitfields whom I'd never met. When I called Eleanor to ask about it, her response was brisk. "Mum, the head table is just for the wedding party, and the second table is already full with Jackson's immediate family and grandparents." "But I'm your immediate family," I said quietly. "You'll be fine where you are. The Havishams are very nice and they're right next to the dance floor," she replied before quickly changing the subject. 3 weeks before the wedding, while searching for a suitable card to accompany Eleanor's gift, I found myself looking through the old cherrywood box where I kept Carl's letters. He had been an incurable romantic, writing me notes throughout our marriage. Everything from passionate declarations to simple grocery lists signed with "All my love, C." Among the yellowing papers, I found an envelope I'd forgotten about. In Carl's neat handwriting, it was addressed to Eleanor on her wedding day. I vaguely remembered him writing letters to Eleanor during his final hospital stay, messages for her future milestones he knew he wouldn't live to see. Most had been given to her over the years: her high school graduation, her 18th birthday, her college acceptance. But somehow this one had remained sealed, tucked among my own letters. With trembling hands, I set it aside, determined to give it to Eleanor on her wedding day. Carl's voice from beyond the years. What greater gift could there be? The final dress fitting was scheduled 2 weeks before the wedding. Eleanor had relented slightly on the pantsuit idea after I'd gently insisted that I preferred a dress. Nancy, the stylist, had selected 3 options, none of which made me feel particularly special, but all deemed appropriate by Sylvia's standards. As I stood on the fitting platform, tugging at the conservative navy dress that added 10 years to my appearance, Eleanor circled me with a critical eye. "It's perfect," she declared. "Understated and elegant." "It feels a bit matronly," I ventured. "Maybe something with a bit more colour." Eleanor's expression hardened. "Mum, please don't make this difficult. Everyone has worked so hard to create a cohesive aesthetic for this wedding." As the seamstress pinned a loose section, Eleanor lowered her voice. "Just try not to stand out, okay? This day is about Jackson and me, not about you making some kind of statement." I nodded silently, fighting back tears as I stared at my reflection. The woman looking back at me in the mirror was fading into the background just as my daughter wanted. As I drove home from the fitting, Carl's letter sat on the passenger seat beside me. I wondered what wisdom or love his words contained, and whether they would reach the daughter who seemed determined to erase her past, and me along with it. The morning of Eleanor's wedding dawned with perfect blue skies, the kind of spring day that seemed designed for new beginnings. I woke early, my stomach fluttering with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Despite the tension of recent months, this was still my baby girl's wedding day, and I was determined to make it special. I arrived at the St. Regis Hotel a full 2 hours before the ceremony was set to begin, carrying a bouquet of lily of the valley, Eleanor's favourite flowers as a child. The hotel ballroom had been transformed into a vision of elegant simplicity, with white orchids and crystal accents catching the light from massive chandeliers. "Mrs. Anderson, you're early," said the wedding planner, a sleek young woman with a clipboard and an earpiece. "The bridal suite is on the 3rd floor if you'd like to see Eleanor, but she's in the middle of hair and makeup." "I won't disturb her," I promised. "I just brought these flowers. They were always her favourite." The woman looked at the simple bouquet with barely concealed dismay. "I'll make sure she sees them, but we already have all the florals arranged according to the design plan." I handed over the flowers, trying not to feel disappointed when she set them aside on a service table, rather than taking them directly to Eleanor. Hoping to make myself useful, I began straightening the already perfect rows of ceremony chairs. "Mrs. Anderson, please don't worry about that. The staff has it under control," the wedding planner called over. "Perhaps you'd like to go get ready. The ceremony will begin in just a few hours." Effectively dismissed, I made my way to a small anteroom that had been designated for my use. Unlike the spacious bridal suite where Eleanor was preparing with her bridesmaids, this was clearly a converted storage space with a hastily added makeup mirror. I changed into my navy dress and carefully applied my makeup, making sure to keep it subtle as Eleanor had requested. At my reflection in the mirror, I whispered, "Carl, I wish you were here to see her. She's lost her way a bit, but she's still our beautiful girl." With still over an hour before the ceremony, I decided to try seeing Eleanor one more time. I made my way to the bridal suite and knocked softly. The door swung open to reveal a scene of controlled chaos: champagne flutes on every surface, makeup artists working on Eleanor's 3 bridesmaids, and in the centre, Eleanor herself being attended to by a hairstylist. "Mum," she said, looking up with surprise, "you're early." "I wanted to see if you needed anything," I said, stepping carefully into the room. Eleanor looked stunning in her custom gown, a sleek column of ivory silk that highlighted her slender frame. Her dark hair was partially up in an elegant twist, with the rest still being curled by the stylist. "We've got everything handled," said Madison, Eleanor's maid of honor and college roommate. "Sylvia arranged for the champagne and lunch to be delivered." I nodded, feeling out of place among these polished young women. "You look beautiful, Ellie," I said, using my old nickname for her. Eleanor flinched slightly. "It's Eleanor, Mum. I haven't gone by Ellie since middle school." "Right, sorry," I murmured, then added brightly. "Your father would have been so proud to see you today." A flicker of something, annoyance, crossed Eleanor's face. "Mum, let's not get emotional and ruin the makeup, okay? Why don't you go check if Jackson's parents have arrived? They should be here by now." Recognizing the dismissal, I nodded and backed toward the door. "Of course. I'll see you at the ceremony." As I closed the door, I heard Madison say, "Your mum seems nice." And Eleanor's reply, "She means well, but she can be a lot to handle." In the hallway, I leaned against the wall and took a deep breath. In my purse was Carl's letter waiting for the right moment. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of arrivals and last-minute adjustments. I greeted some of Eleanor's childhood friends and distant relatives, most of whom seemed surprised that I wasn't with the bridal party. Sylvia Whitfield arrived in a designer gown that probably cost more than 3 months of my salary, flanked by her husband and their extended family. "Brenda, there you are," Sylvia called, air-kissing near my cheeks. "You look appropriate. Has Eleanor seen you yet?" "Briefly," I replied. "She's busy with the final preparations." "As she should be. We've worked so hard to make sure everything is perfect." The way she emphasized "we" made it clear I wasn't included in that group. At last, it was time for the ceremony. As mother of the bride, I was escorted to my seat in the front row by a young usher I didn't recognize. Across the aisle, Jackson's mother was escorted by his father, both beaming with pride. The music swelled, not the traditional wedding march Eleanor had once loved, but a string quartet playing a classical piece I didn't recognize. Jackson appeared with the officiant looking handsome and slightly nervous in his custom tuxedo, and then Eleanor appeared at the back of the hall, a vision in white. Despite all the tension and hurt of recent months, my heart swelled with love and pride. This was my little girl, the baby I had rocked through colicky nights, the child whose scraped knees I had bandaged, the teenager whose broken heart I had soothed after her first breakup. As she glided down the aisle, I couldn't help the tears that slipped down my cheeks. Eleanor's eyes briefly met mine, and for a fleeting moment, I saw my real daughter there. Not the polished society bride, but the sweet girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. The ceremony itself was beautiful in its elegant simplicity. The officiant spoke of partnership and mutual respect. When Eleanor and Jackson exchanged vows, they had written themselves. I was touched by the genuine love evident in their words. Whatever my concerns about the Whitfields' influence, it was clear that Jackson truly adored my daughter. "I promise to cherish your strength and support your dreams," Jackson said, his voice steady and sincere. "I promise to stand by you in all of life's moments, creating a future built on trust and respect," Eleanor replied. As they were pronounced husband and wife, the assembled guests broke into applause. I clapped until my hands hurt, happiness momentarily overshadowing my sense of alienation. The cocktail hour that followed was held in an adjacent garden, where white-gloved servers circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres. I found myself standing alone, watching Eleanor and Jackson move through the crowd, accepting congratulations from their guests. "You must be so proud," said an elderly woman, who introduced herself as Jackson's great-aunt Mildred. "I am," I said sincerely. "Eleanor has always been remarkable." "It's not easy watching them grow up and start their own lives," Mildred commented. "My daughter lives in Australia now, feels a world away." I was grateful for the simple human connection so different from the superficial interactions I'd had with most of the other guests. We chatted for several minutes until Mildred was called away by another relative. Left alone again, I sipped my champagne, and observed the social dynamics around me. The Whitfields were clearly in their element, graciously holding court among friends and business associates. Eleanor had been absorbed into their orbit, standing close to Sylvia as they greeted important guests. I tried to join them once approaching with a smile, only to have Sylvia smoothly redirect the conversation to exclude me. "Brenda, have you met the Holloways? They summer near us in the Hamptons," she said, before immediately turning back to them without waiting for my response. As I was saying about the charity gala, I retreated, finding a quiet spot near a flowering cherry tree. An older server noticed my isolation and kindly brought me a fresh glass of champagne. "Thank you," I said gratefully. "Been working these society weddings for 20 years, he confided quietly. "The real important people are usually the ones sitting alone. Everyone else is too busy trying to impress each other." His kindness brought a lump to my throat. When it came time for the reception, I followed the crowd into the grand ballroom, now reset with round tables surrounding a dance floor. Finding my assigned table near the back, I introduced myself to the Havishams and several other distant connections of the Whitfield family. "And how do you know the happy couple?" asked Mrs. Havisham politely. "I'm Eleanor's mother," I replied. "Oh," she looked genuinely surprised. "How lovely. Jackson's family has spoken so highly of Eleanor. She must have had a wonderful upbringing." Before I could respond, the wedding party was announced, culminating with Mr. and Mrs. Jackson Whitfield. Eleanor and Jackson entered to applause, taking their place at the head table, where Sylvia Howard and Jackson's siblings were already seated. Throughout the excellent four-course dinner, I watched Eleanor from afar, noticing how she had adopted Sylvia's mannerisms, the same tilt of the head when listening, the same restrained laugh at jokes. When the time came for toasts, Jackson's father stood first, delivering a polished speech about legacy and future prospects that sounded more like a corporate address than a father's wedding toast. Jackson's best man followed with appropriate anecdotes about their friendship, carefully edited for the formal occasion. Madison then rose to toast Eleanor, sharing stories from their college years. To Eleanor, who has always known exactly what she wanted and how to achieve it, "You've found your perfect match in Jackson." I had prepared a short toast as well, jotting down memories and wishes on a note card in my purse. But as Madison finished to applause, the wedding planner smoothly transitioned to the cake cutting, moving efficiently through the schedule without acknowledging me. As servers cleared the dinner plates, I overheard a woman at the next table ask Eleanor about the stunning floral arrangements. "Weren't they perfect?" Eleanor replied. "Sylvia's designer has impeccable taste." "And what about this whole affair? It must have cost a fortune," the woman said with a meaningful glance around the opulent ballroom. "Well, you know," Eleanor laughed lightly, "when you marry into the Whitfield family, certain standards are expected." My heart sank as I realized Eleanor had effectively erased my financial contribution, and more importantly, the love behind it, from the narrative of her wedding day. It was then that I remembered Carl's letter still waiting in my purse. Perhaps now, before the dancing began, was the moment to give Eleanor this precious connection to her father. The reception was in full swing by the time I gathered my courage to approach Eleanor with Carl's letter. The head table had been cleared, and guests were mingling between courses. Eleanor stood near the cake display, deep in conversation with Sylvia and the wedding planner, gesturing toward the dance floor where the band was setting up. I approached slowly, the envelope clutched in my hand. It had been over 20 years since Carl had written these words for his daughter, saving his strength during his final days to leave pieces of himself behind. "Eleanor," I said softly, touching her elbow, "could I speak with you for a moment?" She turned, surprise evident on her face. "Mum, we're just discussing the first dance. Can it wait?" "It's important," I insisted gently. "I have something special to give you. From your father." Eleanor's expression flickered between irritation and curiosity. "What are you talking about?" "I found a letter," I explained, keeping my voice low. "Your dad wrote it for your wedding day. I only discovered it recently, tucked away with his other letters." Sylvia's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose with interest. "A letter from beyond the grave. How dramatic. Eleanor shot Sylvia an apologetic look before turning back to me. Mum, we're on a tight schedule here. The band is about to announce our first dance. This will only take a moment, I said, holding out the envelope with Carl's familiar handwriting visible. He wanted you to have this today. Eleanor glanced around nervously, clearly concerned about creating a scene. Fine, but make it quick. I tried to lead her to a quieter corner, but she remained firmly in place, unwilling to step away from Sylvia and the wedding planner. Your father wrote letters for all your major life events before he passed. I explained, my voice thick with emotion. This is the last one, for your wedding day. I remember the letters, Eleanor said impatiently, but this really isn't the time to get sentimental about Dad. Everyone's watching. Your father would have loved to walk you down the aisle today. I continued, ignoring her dismissal. This letter is his way of being here with you. The wedding planner checked her watch pointedly. Mrs. Whitfield, we need to cue the band in 3 minutes for your dance. Mum, Eleanor said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. You're disrupting the schedule. We can do this later. It will just take a minute for you to read it, I persisted, holding out the envelope. Please, Eleanor. This was his last gift to you. Sylvia stepped closer, placing a perfectly manicured hand on Eleanor's arm. Perhaps your mother doesn't understand how these events work, dear. Everything is timed precisely. Something in Sylvia's condescending tone must have triggered Eleanor's frustration because her face flushed red. Mum, please stop, she hissed. You've been trying to make this whole wedding about yourself from the beginning. I stepped back, stunned by the accusation. What, Eleanor, that's not true. Isn't it? She snapped, her voice rising slightly. You complained about your dress, about your seating assignment, about not giving a toast. It's like you can't stand that for once the attention isn't on poor, hard-working single mum Brenda. Several nearby guests turned to look, attracting more attention than my simple request ever would have. Eleanor, that's not fair, I said, hurt blooming in my chest. I've only wanted to support you, to share your father's words with you on your wedding day. Well, maybe I don't want to be reminded of him right now. Eleanor's voice had risen further. Maybe I don't want to think about how I grew up without a father, or how we never had what the Whitfields have. Maybe just for today, I want to leave all that behind. The nearby conversations had stopped. In the sudden silence, Eleanor's words seemed to echo across the ballroom. You've embarrassed me my entire life, she continued, her voice dropping but still audible to those standing close by. Always showing up to school functions in your worn-out clothes, working those humiliating catering jobs where you'd serve my classmates' parents, telling everyone those stories about how hard you worked to raise me. Do you have any idea how that made me feel? I stood frozen, the envelope trembling in my hand, as my daughter unleashed years of apparent resentment. Ellie, I whispered unconsciously, using her childhood nickname. I never meant to embarrass you. I was just trying to give you every opportunity. It's Eleanor, she snapped. And right now, all I want is for you to stop making a scene at my wedding. I reached out, trying one more time to hand her the letter. Please just take this. Read it later if you want. It was his last gift to you. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Eleanor's hand came up, not to take the envelope, but to strike it away. Instead, her palm connected with my cheek in a slap that resounded through the suddenly silent reception hall. The sting of the impact was nothing compared to the pain in my heart. Gasps echoed around us as guests turned to stare. Eleanor herself looked shocked at what she had done, her hand still suspended in the air. And then, to everyone's bewilderment, including my own, I began to laugh. It wasn't hysterical or angry laughter, but a sad, knowing chuckle that bubbled up from some deep place of understanding. In that moment of physical impact, everything had suddenly become clear to me. Eleanor stared at me, her face transforming from anger to confusion. Mum, she said uncertainly, why are you laughing? My laughter faded to a sad smile as I gazed at my daughter, this stranger in a designer wedding gown, who had just slapped her mother in front of 200 guests. The reception hall remained eerily silent, all eyes fixed on our family drama, unfolding beside an elaborate 5-tier wedding cake. "Eleanor," I said quietly, "may I have the microphone for a moment?" "Absolutely not," Sylvia interjected, stepping forward protectively. "I think you've created quite enough of a spectacle." Jackson, who had been across the room greeting guests, appeared at Eleanor's side, his face a mask of confusion. "What's happening? Is everything okay?" Eleanor's cheeks had flushed crimson with embarrassment or shame, perhaps both. "Mum's trying to make a scene," she muttered. I looked directly at Jackson. "I'd like 2 minutes to speak to my daughter and your guests. Then I'll leave quietly if that's what Eleanor wants." Something in my calm demeanor must have convinced him. Jackson nodded to the band leader, who reluctantly handed over a microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my teacher's voice automatically projecting clear and strong despite my emotional turmoil. "First, I want to apologize for this disruption to what has been a beautiful celebration." Murmurs rippled through the crowd as I continued. "My name is Brenda Anderson. Some of you know me as Eleanor's mother." I paused, looking around at the sea of faces, most strangers to me despite my central role in the bride's life. "What many of you don't know is the journey that brought us to this day." Eleanor stepped forward, her eyes wide with panic. "Mom, don't." I smiled at her reassuringly. "I'm not going to embarrass you, Eleanor. I just want to share something true." Turning back to the guests, I continued. "When Eleanor was 8 years old, her father Carl passed away after a battle with cancer. His final gift to her was a series of letters to be opened at important moments in her life. Today, I tried to give her the last of those letters." I held up the envelope, Carl's handwriting visible to those nearby. "This represents the voice of a father who couldn't be here today, but who loved his daughter more than life itself." Several guests wiped away tears, and I noticed even Howard Whitfield had lowered his ever-present phone to listen. "Eleanor just asked why I laughed when she slapped me," I continued. "I laughed because in that moment I finally understood something important. You see, I've spent the past 24 years trying to give Eleanor everything, sometimes at great personal cost." I took a deep breath before continuing. "What my daughter doesn't know, or perhaps has forgotten, is that 3 months ago I sold my home, the small house I purchased after selling our family home when Carl died, to help pay for this wedding." Gasps echoed through the ballroom. Eleanor's face drained of color as she stared at me in disbelief. The $75,000 I contributed wasn't mentioned in the wedding program or the speeches. That's okay. I didn't do it for recognition. I did it because I loved my daughter and wanted her to have the wedding of her dreams. Jackson turned to Eleanor, confusion evident on his face. "You told me your mum was contributing a small amount, but that your savings and my parents were covering most of it." I didn't want to embarrass you," Eleanor stammered. "I thought you'd feel obligated to tell your parents." I continued calmly. "Throughout Eleanor's childhood, I worked 3 jobs to put her through private school. I worked as a teacher during the day at a bookstore in the evenings, and catered events on weekends, sometimes serving food at parties hosted by her classmates' parents." Sylvia Whitfield's perfect composure slipped slightly as understanding dawned on her face. "I'm not sharing this to make anyone feel guilty," I clarified. "I made those choices willingly out of love, but I want Eleanor to understand something that her father tried to teach her before he died." I looked directly at my daughter, whose anger had been replaced by a stunned expression. "Carl knew he was leaving us too soon. In his final weeks, he wrote letters for Eleanor's future milestones. In this last letter, which she hasn't read, he wrote about his hopes for her wedding day. Not about the venue or the flowers or the dress, but about the values he hoped she would carry into her marriage." I reached into the envelope and removed a single folded page yellow with age. He wrote, "My dearest Eleanor, if you're reading this, you've found someone to love who loves you in return. That's life's greatest gift. Remember that the size of a wedding doesn't measure the strength of a marriage. Character, kindness, and authenticity are the true measure of wealth." Tears streamed down my face as I read Carl's words aloud. The Anderson women have always been strong, resilient, and true to themselves. Never be ashamed of where you came from, Ellie Bean. It's the struggles that shaped you into the remarkable person you are. Eleanor's composure crumbled at the sound of her father's pet name for her. Tears welled in her eyes as I continued reading. If your mother is still with you, treasure her. No one will ever fight for you or love you more fiercely. She promised me she would give you the world, and knowing Brenda, she's kept that promise even at great cost to herself. I folded the letter and looked up. Carl's final wish was that Eleanor would use a portion of the wedding money to establish a small foundation to help homeless women, a cause he volunteered for before he became ill. He believed that sharing our blessings with others was the truest expression of joy. Eleanor was openly crying now, mascara tracking down her cheeks. Jackson stood beside her, his arm around her shoulders, his expression thoughtful. Originally before meeting Jackson and his wonderful family, I continued choosing my words carefully. Eleanor had planned a simple garden wedding that would have left enough funds to fulfill her father's wish. Somewhere along the way, those plans changed. Sylvia stepped forward, her perfect facade cracking slightly. We had no idea you had made such sacrifices, Brenda. Eleanor told us you were comfortable with the arrangements. Howard Whitfield cleared his throat. Where are you living now, Mrs. Anderson, if you sold your home? I have a small apartment near my school, I answered simply. It's all I need. The silence in the ballroom was profound. I handed the microphone back to the band leader and turned to Eleanor. I'm sorry if I've embarrassed you, I said quietly. That was never my intention today, or ever. I've only wanted you to have every opportunity, every advantage I could possibly provide. Perhaps I went about it the wrong way. I held out the letter to her once more. This belongs to you. Your father's final words. Whether you read it now or later is your choice. Eleanor stood frozen for a long moment, tears streaming down her face. Then, to my surprise, she stepped forward and threw her arms around me. Mum, she sobbed against my shoulder. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I never realized. Jackson approached us, his expression somber. Mrs. Anderson, I had no idea about your contribution or your sacrifices. I would never have allowed my family to take credit had I known. Eleanor pulled back, wiping her tears. I was so ashamed of our background of being different from Jackson's family. I wanted to fit in so badly that I tried to erase where I came from, who I really am. I touched her cheek gently. You have nothing to be ashamed of, Eleanor. You are the daughter of a teacher and a social worker who loved each other and you more than anything in this world. That's a heritage to be proud of. Eleanor took the letter from me with trembling hands. I'd like to read this. With you. Sylvia attempted to intervene. Perhaps this is a private moment best saved for after the reception. We still have the first dance and cake cutting scheduled. To my surprise, it was Jackson who responded. Mother, I think the schedule can wait. Some things are more important. As Eleanor read her father's words, her tears flowing freely, the wedding guests began to quietly talk among themselves, giving us a small bubble of privacy in the midst of the crowded ballroom. He knew, Eleanor whispered. Somehow Dad knew I might lose my way. I hugged her again, my own tears falling. He was very wise, and he loved you very much. Jackson gently touched Eleanor's shoulder. Sweetheart, I fell in love with you, not with some version of you that you thought I wanted. I'd like to hear more about your father, about the foundation he wanted to create. Howard Whitfield approached, looking uncomfortable but determined. Mrs. Anderson, we had no intention of overshadowing your contribution to this wedding. The Whitfield Foundation would be honored to help establish the fund Eleanor's father envisioned. I smiled at him, seeing perhaps the first genuine moment we'd shared. That would be a wonderful wedding gift. As the initial shock subsided, the wedding planner anxiously approached. Should we proceed with the reception schedule? The band is waiting for the first dance cue. Eleanor looked at me, then at Jackson, and finally at the crowd of guests. Yes, she said firmly, but with one change. She turned to me. Mum, would you please join Jackson and me for the first part of our dance? I think Dad would have wanted that. As the band began to play, not the carefully rehearsed waltz, but What a Wonderful World, Carl's favourite song, I took my daughter's hand and joined her on the dance floor, carrying the weight of truth and the lightness of reconciliation in every step. The moments that followed my revelation created a seismic shift in the atmosphere of the wedding reception. The carefully orchestrated schedule, loosened like a tightly wound clock, suddenly allowed to tick at its natural pace. Eleanor, still clutching her father's letter, moved through the crowd with a new authenticity, introducing me properly to Jackson's extended family and colleagues. "This is my mother, Brenda," she said repeatedly, her hand firmly holding mine. "She's the reason I'm who I am today." Meanwhile, I found myself the center of attention in a way I had never sought nor expected. Howard Whitfield, notably more engaged than he'd been all day, asked thoughtful questions about Carl's foundation idea. Jackson's grandfather, a self-made businessman before the Whitfield hotel empire expanded, sought me out to share stories of his own humble beginnings. "Takes guts to stand up like that," he said, clinking his champagne glass against mine. "This family could use more of that straight talk." As the evening progressed, I slipped away from the main celebration to catch my breath in a quiet alcove. The emotional whiplash of the day, from isolation to confrontation to unexpected reconciliation, had left me feeling both drained and strangely empowered. I was surprised when a young woman approached, Kate Donovan, Eleanor's childhood best friend, who had drifted away during the college years. "Mrs. Anderson," she said hesitantly, "may I join you?" "Kate." I smiled, genuinely pleased to see her. "Of course, and please, it's still Brenda." She sat beside me, fidgeting with her clutch purse. I wanted to say, "What happened earlier?" "Eleanor hasn't been herself for a long time." I nodded, encouraging her to continue. "When she started dating Jackson, she became obsessed with fitting in with his crowd. She was so afraid they'd think she wasn't good enough." Kate looked down at her hands. "She made me promise not to talk about her childhood, or how we met in public school before she transferred to Westfield Academy." "I had no idea it had gone that far," I said softly. Kate's eyes filled with tears. "She was my best friend for 15 years, but I barely recognize her anymore. When she didn't ask me to be a bridesmaid because I wouldn't fit with the aesthetic, her exact words, I almost didn't come today." "I'm glad you did," I told her sincerely. "The thing is," Kate continued, her voice stronger, "Eleanor was always so proud of you when we were kids. She used to brag about how you could do anything, fix the car, help with calculus homework, sew her dance costumes. 'My mum's a superhero,' she'd say." My heart ached at the memory of that sweet, appreciative child. "I think," Kate said carefully, "Eleanor developed this deep insecurity about not being enough on her own. When Jackson came along with his perfect family and background, she thought she needed to become someone else to deserve him." As Kate spoke, pieces of the puzzle began to fit together. The gradual changes in Eleanor, her increasing embarrassment about our modest lifestyle, her desperate attempts to erase any trace of her background. It wasn't simple snobbery. It was fear. Fear of not belonging, of not being worthy of the life she wanted. "Thank you for telling me this, Kate," I said, squeezing her hand. "Sometimes as parents we're too close to see the whole picture." Kate smiled sadly. "For what it's worth, I think the real Eleanor, the one I grew up with, is still in there somewhere." As Kate returned to the reception, I remained in the alcove processing our conversation. Maybe I had failed Eleanor in ways I hadn't recognized, focusing so much on providing material opportunities that I'd neglected to build her sense of inherent worth. Eventually, I decided it was time for me to leave. The emotional crescendo of the evening had been reached, and I wanted Eleanor to enjoy the rest of her wedding night without feeling obligated to navigate our newly raw relationship. I found my purse and quietly made my way toward the exit. In the grand foyer, I heard rapid footsteps behind me. "Mum," Where are you going? I turned to find Eleanor still in her wedding gown, but with her elaborate hairstyle now slightly dishevelled, her makeup smudged from tears. I thought it best to slip out quietly, I explained. You should enjoy your reception. You can't leave, she insisted, reaching for my hand. Not like this, not after everything. Eleanor, it's okay. We can talk tomorrow. No, she said firmly, sounding more like the determined little girl I remembered. Jackson and I have been talking. We're cutting the cake early and then we're going to step out for a while. I want you to come with us. There's a lot I need to say to you and it can't wait until tomorrow. The sincerity in her eyes convinced me. I nodded, allowing her to lead me back into the reception. The impromptu cake cutting was a simpler, more joyful affair than might have been planned. Eleanor and Jackson laughed genuinely as they fed each other small bites, and when Eleanor caught my eye across the room, her smile reached all the way to her eyes for the first time that day. Afterwards, as the band encouraged guests onto the dance floor, Eleanor and Jackson slipped away, gesturing for me to follow them. We found ourselves in a small library adjacent to the main event spaces, its wood-panelled walls and leather chairs, offering a peaceful retreat from the celebration. Eleanor sat beside me on a small sofa, while Jackson took a chair nearby, giving us space but staying close in support. I don't even know where to begin, Eleanor said, her voice thick with emotion. I'm so ashamed of how I've treated you. Honey, you don't need to, I started, but she shook her head. I do need to. I've been horrible to you, Mum. Not just today, but for years now. She twisted her new wedding ring nervously. When Dad died, you became everything to me. You worked so hard, sacrificed so much. Somewhere along the way, I started to feel guilty about all you were giving up for me. This perspective had never occurred to me. Eleanor, I never wanted you to feel guilty. Everything I did was because I wanted to, not because I had to. I know that now, she said softly. But as a kid, I saw how tired you were all the time, how you never bought anything for yourself, how you were aging before your time from all the stress and work. I started to feel like a burden. Jackson reached over to squeeze her hand supportively. When I got to Westfield and saw how the other kids lived, the ease of it all, the parents who were present at every event because they didn't have to work 3 jobs, I started creating this fantasy that if we were like them, you wouldn't have to struggle so much. Eleanor wiped away a tear. It twisted over time into shame about our circumstances when I should have been proud of everything you overcame. I felt a lump forming in my throat. Oh, Ellie, I never knew you felt that way. Meeting Jackson's family brought it all to a head, she continued. They seemed to have everything figured out, everything perfect. I was terrified they'd see through me, realize I didn't belong in their world. So I tried to erase anything that might give me away, including you. Jackson spoke up gently. I need to take some responsibility here too, Mrs. Anderson. I noticed Eleanor changing, becoming more concerned with appearances and status. I should have said something, should have reassured her that I loved her for who she was, not for how well she could blend into my family's social circle. We both got caught up in it, Eleanor acknowledged. But Mum selling your house. Why didn't you tell me? I smiled sadly. Would you have accepted the money if you'd known where it came from? Her silence was answer enough. I wanted you to have the wedding you deserved, I explained. If that meant downsizing, it seemed a small price to pay for your happiness. I just didn't realize how far you'd drifted from the values your father and I tried to instill. Dad's letter, Eleanor said, pulling the worn page from a hidden pocket in her wedding dress. He knew somehow. Listen to this part. Remember that trying to be someone you're not is like wearing shoes that don't fit. You might look good standing still, but you'll never walk comfortably or run freely. We both laughed through our tears at Carl's practical wisdom. He wrote that 20 years ago, I marveled. He always could see right to the heart of things. Jackson stood up. I should get back to our guests for a bit. Why don't you two take all the time you need? Before leaving, he knelt beside Eleanor. I love you, Eleanor Anderson Whitfield. The real you, not some polished society version. And I think it's time we revisited that foundation idea your father had. It sounds like exactly the kind of legacy we should start our marriage with. After he left, Eleanor and I sat in comfortable silence for a moment. I don't even know if I can fix this, she finally said. I've been so awful to you. Relationships aren't broken and fixed like objects, Eleanor. They evolve and transform. We're already beginning something new right now. Eleanor leaned her head against my shoulder, just as she used to do as a little girl. I'm going to do better, Mum. I promise. Starting with finding you a new house. That's not necessary. It is, she insisted. Dad would want it, and I want it. Jackson and I don't need a lavish honeymoon or fancy new furniture. We need to make this right. We talked for nearly an hour, reminiscing about Carl, about Eleanor's childhood, and about the genuine Eleanor who had been hidden beneath layers of social aspiration and insecurity. Eventually, we returned to the reception. The atmosphere had changed subtly but significantly. Sylvia Whitfield approached us, her perfect composure slightly softened. Brenda, Eleanor, she said carefully, I owe you both an apology. I was so caught up in creating the perfect Whitfield wedding that I never considered what this day really meant to you both. Thank you, Sylvia, I replied sincerely. Today has been full of unexpected revelations for all of us. As the evening drew to a close, I found myself on the dance floor with Eleanor and Jackson, surrounded by guests, who now looked at me with new understanding and respect. When the band played Unforgettable, the song Carl and I had danced to at our own wedding, Eleanor insisted I join them again. Dad would want you here, she said, her eyes clear and honest, in a way they hadn't been for years. As I watched my daughter dance with her husband, her face alight with genuine happiness rather than social performance, I felt Carl's presence strongly. He would have been proud of Eleanor's journey today, not the elaborate wedding, but the moment of truth that had brought our daughter back to herself. By the time the last dance was announced, a remarkable transformation had taken place. The polished society wedding had become something more authentic, a true celebration of family flaws and all. The days following Eleanor's wedding passed in a whirlwind of emotional conversations and tentative new beginnings. Instead of departing immediately for their planned 3-week European honeymoon, Eleanor and Jackson decided to postpone the trip, staying in the city for a few days, to process everything that had happened. The morning after the wedding, I woke in my small apartment, surrounded by the few possessions I'd kept after selling my house. On the bedside table lay Carl's letters, the ones he'd written to me that I'd saved all these years. I picked one up, smiling at his familiar handwriting. You were right, Carl, I whispered. She found her way back. My phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor. Can we come over this morning? I made some coffee cake, your recipe. Within the hour, Eleanor and Jackson arrived at my door. Eleanor carried a slightly lopsided coffee cake, Jackson a bouquet of fresh flowers. The awkwardness of our new reality hung in the air for only a moment, before Eleanor set down the cake and wrapped me in a tight hug. I barely slept, she confessed. I kept reading Dad's letter over and over. Jackson arranged the flowers in a water glass. I didn't own a proper vase anymore, and looked around my modest apartment with new understanding. Mrs. Anderson, he began. Brenda, please, I corrected gently. Brenda, he nodded. I want you to know that I had no idea about your financial contribution to our wedding. Eleanor and I have been talking, and we'd like to help you find a new home. I started to protest, but Eleanor interrupted. Mum, please, let us do this. Dad would want it, and so do we. As we sat around my small kitchen table eating coffee cake, Eleanor opened up about the insecurities that had driven her behavior over the past few years. When I first met Jackson, I was so afraid his family would think I wasn't good enough, she admitted. Everyone in his circle came from these established families with perfect pedigrees and trust funds. I felt like an imposter. Jackson reached for her hand. which is ridiculous because it was your background that made me fall in love with you in the first place. All those stories about your childhood, how your mum would help you build science projects, how you'd have movie nights with blanket forts in the living room." Eleanor looked surprised. "You loved those stories. I thought you were just being polite." "Are you kidding? My childhood was all boarding schools and formal dinners with my parents' business associates. Your family sounded like something out of a heartwarming movie." I smiled at the irony. "All this time you were trying to become more like Jackson's family, when what he loved was the Eleanor we raised." "I got so caught up in appearances," Eleanor acknowledged. "I started believing that your worth as a person was tied to your social status, your possessions. Somewhere along the way, I forgot everything you and Dad taught me about what really matters." We talked for hours that morning, peeling back layers of misunderstanding and hurt that had accumulated over the years. Eleanor confessed how her embarrassment about our modest circumstances had transformed into a kind of social anxiety, constantly fearing she would be found out as not truly belonging in Jackson's world. "I think I was trying to protect myself," she said quietly. "If I could become the perfect Whitfield wife, no one could ever make me feel less than again." "Oh, Eleanor," I sighed. "If only you'd talk to me about these feelings." "I couldn't," she admitted. "I was ashamed of being ashamed, if that makes any sense. And the longer it went on, the harder it became to break the cycle." Later that afternoon, Eleanor asked to see the rest of Carl's letters. We sat together on my small sofa, going through the worn pages of Carl's thoughts and dreams for our daughter. "He knew me so well," Eleanor marveled, reading a letter he'd written for her college graduation, "even though he left when I was only 8. "Your father had remarkable insight," I agreed. "He understood people in a way that sometimes took me years to catch up to." 3 days after the wedding, Eleanor called with an unexpected request. "Mum, would you come with me to visit Dad's grave? I haven't been in years, and I feel like I need to, I don't know, reconnect with him somehow." The three of us, Eleanor, Jackson, and I, stood beside Carl's simple headstone the following morning. Eleanor placed fresh flowers beside the granite marker, tracing her fingers over the engraved words, "Carl James Anderson, beloved husband, father and friend to all in need." "I forgot that last part," Eleanor said softly. "Dad's work with the homeless shelter." "It was his passion project," I explained to Jackson. "He spent every Saturday morning there helping people write resumes, navigate social services. He believed everyone deserved dignity and a second chance." Eleanor knelt beside the grave. "I'm sorry, Dad. I lost my way for a while, but I'm finding my way back." On the drive back, Eleanor shared her idea. "Jackson and I have been talking about Dad's foundation idea. We want to make it happen." Jackson nodded from the driver's seat. "We've already spoken to my father. The Whitfield Foundation is prepared to match whatever funds we put in to establish the Carl Anderson Second Chance Fund." I felt tears welling in my eyes. Carl would be so proud. The following week brought another surprise. Eleanor and Jackson invited me to dinner at their apartment, not the sleek penthouse they'd initially planned to purchase, but a warm, charming brownstone in a diverse neighborhood. "We decided ostentation isn't really our style," Jackson explained as he gave me a tour. "And this place has character." Over dinner they shared their revised plans. The extravagant honeymoon had been scaled back to a simple trip to Maine, where Carl and I had honeymooned 26 years earlier. The money saved would go toward the foundation and helping me find a new home. "We've been thinking about priorities," Eleanor explained. "What really matters to us as we start our life together." 6 months later, I stood in the doorway of a modest but beautiful garden apartment not far from my school. Eleanor and Jackson had helped me find it, close enough for regular visits, but giving me independence and privacy. That evening, we were hosting our first joint family dinner, Eleanor and Jackson Howard, and Sylvia Whitfield and me. It was Sylvia who had suggested the gathering, much to everyone's surprise. "Life's too short for artificial divisions," she had said when she called to propose the idea. The Whitfields had undergone their own reckoning after the wedding revelation. Howard in particular had developed a new respect for me and what I had sacrificed for Eleanor. As we gathered around my new dining table, a housewarming gift from Eleanor and Jackson, the conversation flowed more naturally than I could have imagined 6 months earlier. Brenda was just showing me Carl's old letters, Sylvia said, her usual polish softened by genuine interest. What a remarkable tradition. Dad was all about leaving something meaningful behind, Eleanor explained. Which reminds me, she glanced at Jackson, who nodded encouragingly. We have some news, Eleanor continued, her face glowing with happiness. I'm pregnant. We're going to have a baby in the spring. Joy erupted around the table. Hugs and congratulations flowed freely, and for a moment I felt Carl's presence strongly in the room, as if he too were celebrating this new life. Later, as Eleanor helped me clear the dinner plates, she spoke softly, so only I could hear. Mum, I want you to be a big part of this baby's life. I want my child to know where they come from, both sides of their family. The values you and Dad taught me, the strength and resilience that made our family special. I held my daughter close, feeling the full circle of our journey. I would be honored. And, she added with a smile that reached her eyes, I'm going to need all your wisdom, all those things you did to make childhood magical even when money was tight. Blanket forts in the living room, I suggested. Exactly, she laughed. The real treasures. That night, after everyone had left, I sat alone in my new garden, looking up at the stars. The same stars Carl and I had gazed at during late-night talks about our hopes for Eleanor's future. The journey had been neither straight nor easy, but somehow we had all arrived where we needed to be. The path to authentic living is rarely smooth, and sometimes we need to lose our way before we can truly find ourselves. Eleanor's slap at her wedding had been painful but necessary, the catalyst for truth that had been buried for too long. As I thought about the grandchild growing inside Eleanor, I felt profound gratitude for second chances and the healing power of honesty. Carl had known that sometimes love requires difficult truths. His letters had been waiting all these years, ready to guide Eleanor home when she was ready to listen. I've lived long enough to know that life isn't about the big houses or perfect appearances. It's about the courage to be authentically yourself, even when that's the hardest path to walk. Eleanor had rediscovered this wisdom just in time to pass it on to her own child, a legacy more valuable than any material wealth. Have you ever had to stand up for an important truth even when it was difficult? Has a painful moment in your life ever led to unexpected healing? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your stories of reconciliation and growth. And if this journey resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that authentic love sometimes requires courage. Thank you for joining me for this deeply personal story. And remember, it's never too late to find your way back to what truly matters.